with Daniels, it's something about the jump from year one to year two historically for the truly elite players in fantasy. We saw what happened with Patrick Mahomes going from year one to year two, wins the MVP. Unbelievable year for Mahomes that season, finished as a QB1 in fantasy. Lamar Jackson, a part-time player as a rookie, wins the MVP, finishes as a QB1 in fantasy in year two. I get a lot of parallels here with Jayden Daniels.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Identifying this year's top scorers at every single position in fantasy football for 2025. Theo Greminger, Fantasy Football Daily on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network, rejoined today by Dave Kluge. Dave Kluge came on this show maybe 6 weeks ago, and you crushed it so hard that we're bringing you back already. We're switching it up, though. Last time we did our favorite picks and least favorite picks in each round. We're going to do the follow-up on your show, so you got to check out the Football Guys channel for that one. But Dave, like, talking about these elite scorers, it seems like a simplistic thing to do. But I think a lot of times we often get caught somewhat ignoring the very top and having tiers. You ask a lot of fantasy analysts that you respect, you'll say, hey, who's the top quarterback this year? And they'll say, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and I like Jalen Hurts too. That's my top tier. And then you'll say, tight ends, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, the top three. Those are the top three you want. But oftentimes I think tier-based drafting, although there's a ton of benefits, it also gets us in a lot of trouble. Time and time again, you see a gap between the top scorer at the position and the number two. In some years, it's amplified. Last year, if you had Ja'Marr Chase over Justin Jefferson, you had a significant gap. If you had Lamar Jackson over Josh Allen, you had a gap. And if you had Lamar Jackson over any other quarterback, you had a huge advantage, especially reflective to his ADP. So my first question to you is, your thoughts on tiers? Do you somewhat agree with me here on this? Tiers-based drafting can be somewhat of a crutch for us in misidentifying edges in fantasy football.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And everybody does tier-based drafting right now. I'm actually coming out with articles right now every single week where I'm going through position by position, breaking these players up in tiers, kind of talking about how my rankings compare to the consensus, talking about where they diverge and adding some context to that. But you do fall into this trap. And I don't say you, I mean you and me and a lot of drafters, where you always want to catch the end of that tier. And I found myself, you mentioned it, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jayden Daniels. I think everybody lumps those guys in a tier together. And I so often fell into this trap early in drafts saying like, well, I'm not going to draft Josh Allen. I'm not going to draft Lamar Jackson because I'm just going to wait for Jayden Daniels, which is great because I think Jayden Daniels could realistically be the QB1 this year, but then you're not getting any exposure to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, who have equally high ceilings. And like we saw last year, Lamar Jackson was outscoring Josh Allen by 2-3 points per game. And if you didn't have it that way in your rankings and you were just waiting to the end of that tier and taking Jalen Hurts or whoever you had at the end of that tier, didn't get any Lamar Jackson, you didn't have a chance of taking down the league. Something else that we see now is that we're not seeing people pay up for the elite of the elite like they were in years past. Like it was just 2 years ago where, Travis Kelce was going in round one. And then in round two, you had Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson all kind of go in round two or that 2-3 turn. Now with the edge from the elite guys getting pushed down a little bit, it's not unrealistic to think that you could walk away from a draft with the number one wide receiver, the number one running back, the number one quarterback, and the number one tight end. And that's not something that you've been able to do historically.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point that you pointed out. I think another interesting thing is over the years, it's something that I've continually said, and I'm sure you agree with, that the sort of the altruist thing that all great fantasy players share is not necessarily they all drafted this league winner, but the willingness to put in time and effort on the waiver wire all season long. Like any league you're in, whether it's a home league or it's the FFPC main event, you're seeing a lot of these players who you're like, this guy kind of is up in the top of the standings every year in my league. Really annoying. But it's a lot of times if you go and look at the waiver wire, these same managers are putting the time and effort in. But I think you make a great point that the pressure put on us to hit the waiver wire and churn the back end of our roster goes down just so significantly if you can identify one or two top level scorers. If you have that sort of positional edge, then you're absolutely gold. And this year, I completely agree with you. The wide receivers seem very appropriately priced. And we're going to talk about some dark horses later. But usually, when we're looking for dark horses to finish as the RB1 or the wide receiver one, it usually stops in like the second round for me. And I know the guy you mentioned is also routinely a second round pick. But this year, where quarterbacks being drafted, and to some extent where tight ends being drafted, you could end up realistically with three of the top scorers on your team. So that's a wild thing you said. So now all we got to do is we got to identify it. Let me ask you another question. A lot of times you'll start seeing rankings come out, my guys, all sorts of content this time of year. Are people who stay set in their ways sort of doomed? This is a difficult one because we're in the information age. You get so much information coming out from all these beat reporters. There's film coming out from training camp. Should we be overly set in our ways and try to come up with preconceived rankings and targets this time of year? Or are we foolish if we sort of disregard some of the information that's going to be coming our way over the next 6-8 weeks?
I mean, it's such a hard question to answer. And I think that it's really a delicate balance, and every analyst is going to do it a little bit differently. I always kind of use the term that my rankings are a living and breathing document from the time the Super Bowl ends until the next season kicks off. And they're constantly getting adjusted. I mean, I've got my rankings window open on my laptop 24/7, and I am constantly just looking at it. This doesn't feel right. This feels wrong. I think one of the things you don't want to do is overreact to small bits of news, but there's also, like I said, it's a delicate balance. Like when training camp comes out, it would be foolish to ignore what we hear in training camp. I think this time of year especially is when you don't want to adjust too much. Basically from like the end of OTAs to the beginning of training camp, I don't think there's any news that comes out that's going to make me drastically change my rankings. But once we start getting word in training camp, like right now in OTAs, this is just a story that I'm pulling out of my mind. But, Jack Besh was a guy who was drafted in round 2. Dante Thornton was a day 3 guy, but we're getting word that Dante Thornton, he fits schematically with what the Raiders are looking for. He's practicing with the ones. Jack Besh is practicing with the 2s. That alone is enough for me because it makes sense schematically that they need an X receiver on this offense. So I moved Jack Besh down. I moved Dante Thornton up. Now, if we get into training camp and we get new reports that, hey, Jack Besh is actually looking really good and he's practicing with the ones, I'll switch that again. So it really is this tough balance. And I know I'm just kind of talking in circles here, but I don't know if there really is a right answer. You want to stay firm to your process, but you also want to adjust to new information that comes in. And I think that every analyst is going to have, that slider that they're going to move, how much they are willing to adjust or not. I think I stay pretty firm in my stances until training camp. I think that's the valuable information we get. I think everything from the draft until training camp is a lot of smoke and mirrors. But if you're not changing to new information as it's coming in throughout training camp, I think you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And I think that having that balance where you've done your research, you have sort of these set ideas, but it's the willingness to be able to adjust even slightly. And football is a sport where it's the collection of the parts, especially on offense, where we'll see like a significant offensive lineman go down with an injury. That needs to be like recognized by us as fantasy managers. If a backup running back might go down, like we saw with Chase Brown last year, if the number 3 running back is not ready to fill in that role, the volume can increase for the starter. Like there's a lot of nuance to this. I think the main thing is be able to shuffle what's real and what's not. I mean, I like a good training camp video more than anyone. I, of course, will get the hype machine going as much as possible on X. But at the end of the day, there's certain beat reporters we trust. There's certain teams that I think are more trustworthy than others. And I think over the years, just be able to shift that through, have a couple sources that you trust on this fantasy analyst might be able to kind of shuffle the news coming in maybe better than others. Maybe it's somebody who just reports on NFL that you trust a little bit more than others. But there's just so many voices. You don't want to get inundated with like 30 different people's opinions. Like have a little bit of clarity, limit the voices, and take in the information. We don't want to overreact to it, but when it's something meaningful, we want to react. Last question for you. I asked you, we're going to identify the top scorer at every single position, at least our prediction as of early July. Which was the most difficult position for you to choose without revealing the player?
Running back for sure. I think that you've got a pretty tight cluster of running backs. And, even when we start talking about the dark horse guys, I could have grabbed some guys in round like 3, 4, and 5 that I think are dark horse candidates to finish at RB1. That's such a volatile position. And wide receivers, I think there's a handful there too, but I think you kind of know the 3 that you would kind of expect to finish as the wide receiver 1. But running backs, that's a really, really tough one this year. We are in this golden age of young running backs that are just taking the league by storm. We're also seeing these guys in their second and third acts of their career now just rewinding the clock and looking better than ever. So this is a year where you'd think that I'm sitting here talking about the depth of the running back room. You'd think it would be a good year to wait on running backs, but I actually do find myself in these first 3 rounds trying to draft 1 or 2 running backs because I think that there's a lot of guys going in those first 3, maybe even 4 rounds that have just sky high ceilings where they can give you 23, 24, 25 points per game.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think even if we didn't have this exceptional rookie running back class coming in, the Ashton Genties of the world, we'd still be really excited about the running back position. And like you said, there's a number of young players all entering in year 3 that are big time challengers for the RB1 overall. We'll start out with Dave on this one. You gave us the most difficult position. Let us know who the RB1 overall is going to be this year.
So I've got my RB1 this year is Saquon Barkley. I mean, it's just a perfect match of a player who is in his prime right now. And I know some people are going to get scared off being 28 years old, but people are also getting scared off by the touch count from last year. But we're just seeing a guy that we know since he came into the league is just an athletic phenom, has always just been hindered by bad offenses that he's been a part of in New York. Now playing behind one of the league's best offensive lines. I don't expect the offensive philosophy to change too much from last year. They promoted from within, so it's going to be a very similar office. Nick Sirianni is still the play caller over there. Just a good player in the prime of his career on a good offense. I can make arguments for a lot of other guys, and I talked about it. It's a very difficult position, but Saquon Barkley is my RB1, and I don't see anything happening outside of an injury that would move him off of that spot.
Yeah, I think Barkley's an interesting one, and I'll pour a little bit of cold water on this one because he had 482 touches, including the Super Bowl. So
Yeah.
I think like the touch count, he's a next level guy, and I think when it comes to Saquon Barkley and when it comes to Derrick Henry, they're just guys where they're sort of rule breakers. All the explosive runs, the runs over 20 yards, the runs over 40 yards. I'd say that the bull case for Saquon Barkley also involves maybe there's a willingness to use him a little bit more as a pass catcher out of the backfield this year, where we didn't necessarily see that last year. And we've been waiting on a Jalen Hurts targets the running back a little bit more type season. We didn't see it with DeAndre Swift. We didn't see it last year with Saquon Barkley, but we know that it's in his bag. Maybe that's something where the team self-scouts and says, we can keep Saquon a little bit fresher by maybe giving him 4 targets and taking away like 7 carries this game and just get him out in space, a little bit less stress on the body, all that sort of thing. For me, I just think that there's going to be, you lose the offensive coordinator in Philly with Kellen Moore. To me, they win the Super Bowl. There's going to be just a slight regression on the offense overall. Saquon's still as good a bet as any to finish as the RB1 overall. And I might look foolish for this one, but I think I am not going to predict Saquon on this one. For me, I really, really, really wanted to make the case for Jahmyr Gibbs. I've talked about this with Scott Barrett on our pod. I've talked about this the other day. I went on Dynasty Points with Thomas Tipple and Ryan Heath and Jacob Sanderson and Lucas Gilbert over here on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. And I made this bull case that you have the new offensive coordinator coming into Detroit. Jahmyr Gibbs is an unbelievable special talent, maybe the most talented running back in football. And maybe we see a situation this year where it was a little bit more Ben Johnson than it was Dan Campbell, utilizing these 2 running backs almost at a 50-50 split, with David Montgomery just siphoning off so many touchdowns from Gibbs. Gibbs has more touchdowns scored in his first 2 seasons as a pro than Barry Sanders. I think that the receiving upside for him is like 70 receptions. So I think in like the range of outcomes, I think Jahmyr Gibbs having a better season than any running back did last year is in the range of outcomes. but I just can't do it because I think like a lot of my enthusiasm for Gibbs, and I'm going to have a ton of him in drafts, is me a little bit of hope casting and wish casting away David Montgomery. So I'm going to say that my RB1 this year is Bijan Robinson. And like
Oh, wow.
Bijan
I didn't
Robinson,
expect that.
I'm doing a pivot here. I'm pivoting off of Jahmyr Gibbs. And again, if I get a little bit of Dan Campbell saying you're going to see more Jahmyr Gibbs this year, if we get a little bit of John Morton saying we want to utilize Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more as a receiver, or if there's just any indication that David Montgomery is not going to have that sort of full role, I'm going to adjust my rankings on this one. But when it comes to Bijan, I think I have a lot of high expectations now for the Atlanta Falcons offense. I was really critical on Zach Robinson last year during his start, and I completely take everything bad that I said about him back. I think over the second half of last year, he looked like a really sharp play caller. It's year 2 for Robinson. A lot of times we get super excited about these first-year offensive coordinators, these first-year offensive-minded head coaches, but it's actually your colleague, Sigmund Bloom, often talks about we sort of discount how much better year 2 play callers can be. Saw it last year with Todd Monken, where Todd Monken was fantastic his first year in Baltimore, even better last year. I think it could be the case with Zach Robinson this year. And when it comes to Bijan, this was a player that we looked at as sort of a generational talent coming out. He was the 8th overall pick in the NFL draft. We had that frustrating season with Arthur Smith where he was a rookie. But the one big positive when he was a rookie was the 58 receptions, which we didn't know was kind of in his bag coming out of Texas. That was a positive, especially considering it was an Arthur Smith-led offense. But last year, Bijan, so many steps forward. He had nearly 2,000 combined yards, had nearly 1,500 rushing yards, had 400 plus receiving yards. That's now back-to-back seasons where he goes north of 400 receiving yards, 60 receptions last year, and 15 touchdowns. And when we look at how Bijan Robinson played over the second half of last season, Robinson didn't have a 20-point game in the first 5 weeks of the season. And then after that, it was just completely wheels up. I mean, just ripping off 20-plus point week after 20-plus point week. And the way that he closed out the season and the games with Michael Penix at the end of the year, 24 points, 25 points, 31 points. So for me, Bijan Robinson has the receiving upside to catch 80 balls this year. He's going to get 300 carries again. I think that the threat of Tyler Algier is way, way more in the back. Like with Arthur Smith, Algier's usage was unpredictable. I think with Zach Robinson, he's just a true contingent play. It's Bijan Robinson season. I think that there is a Todd Gurley RB1 overall type outcome here in a Sean McVay type offense where I think we could see Bijan average 25 points per game. He's my bet as the RB1. Your thoughts on Bijan? Where does he come in your rankings?
And again, we talk about tiers, and we talk about the danger of tiers, but all three guys that we've just talked about, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson, that's my 1, 2, 3. I've got them all in the same tier. I've got them clustered back to back to back in my rankings. I do prefer Jahmyr Gibbs slightly ahead of Bijan Robinson. We saw that he was productive last year when David Montgomery was on the field, and then when David Montgomery got hurt late in the season, that's when we saw Jahmyr Gibbs just take off and really hit his true ceiling. So I think with Jahmyr Gibbs, you're looking at a guy who's basically giving you a top 5, top 7 floor, and then has the huge ceiling if Montgomery does get phased out. But I think that needs to be more of an injury thing because we can look pre-Ben Johnson and, in 2021, before Ben Johnson was, or no, I'm sorry, there was in 2020, we did see a split where Dan Campbell still did want to split up the running back touches a little bit. But you talk about Tyler Algier, and I think the frustrating thing is they only lean on him in the second half, which leaves meat on the bone for Bijan Robinson. I mean, almost all of Tyler Algier's touches last year came in the second half of games that they were taking the lead. I'd love to see if they would give those touches to Bijan Robinson because that could raise his ceiling even higher. So the usage for Tyler Algier is very predictable. It's just in these games where they're up by 2 scores, they choose to lean on him instead of Bijan. But really splitting hairs between these 3 guys. I've got it Saquon, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan, but I don't think you can go wrong with any of them.
Yeah, I think for me, it's Saquon. It just, I have some on underdog, but when it's come to managed, and I obviously have some Saquon Barkley Dynasty shares that thankfully that I've held onto for a long time, like an ATM machine last year.
Right.
So, but with redraft, I just haven't been clicking that button. He's just going so highly. And again, I worry slightly about the amount of wear and tear that he took on last year and just the sheer volume in the playoffs. So that might come back to haunt me. I'm sure I'll end up with some Saquon Barkley. And you're starting to see this where there's these one-off drafts in like FFPC, NFFC, where Saquon falls to like the 106, 107. In that range, I'll take him all day. It's just when it comes down to having to choose between a Saquon, a Bijan, or Saquon and a Ja'Marr Chase, I just can't pull the trigger this year. So again, it's pre-July 4th though. So I'm going to put a little asterisk on the lack of Bijan. I mean, the lack of Saquon. Maybe I have a little bit later on. Let's talk about quarterback. Okay, we talked about this in the pre-show a little bit. Last year, Lamar Jackson was this unbelievable edge. Ended up having just a phenomenal season. Does he repeat as this year's QB1 overall?
I'd love if he did, but it was just blistering efficiency last year. And I think when you look at efficiency, you can always bank on Lamar Jackson. You can't compare him to the median. He's always going to be one of the most efficient players in the NFL. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was just almost impossible what he was doing last year. The team was 31st in pass attempts, and he still was able to finish as the QB1. And that you're getting this rushing upside for Lamar Jackson that really unlocks his ceiling. But Josh Allen, this is just a team that runs more plays. When they get near the goal line in Baltimore, they like to turn around and stick the ball in Derrick Henry's belly. When they get to the goal line in Buffalo, Josh Allen just kind of takes the ball out of the shotgun, waits till he finds a little crease, and just slams through it like a battering ram. So he's got some of the same touchdown upside that a guy like Jalen Hurts might have, albeit doing it with his legs rather than getting pushed in. But Josh Allen, this is a guy who's been a top 2 QB for 5 straight seasons. I'm a big Lamar Jackson fan. You can see the jersey behind me right now. But Josh Allen is my QB1 going into 2025.
Yeah, and Josh Allen has just been, he's on like the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football quarterbacks. He's just been so good and been doing it for so long. Finished as a QB2 overall last year. I think Buffalo, they have a great offensive line. They made a few sort of like sneaky moves where not necessarily guys that are ever going to be fantasy football relevant, but Josh Palmer, they add Josh Palmer, they add Elijah Moore, Keon Coleman.
Elijah Moore too, yeah.
Keon Coleman's a year older. And obviously Khalil Shakir made some steps forward last year. So like that offense has continuity, whereas last year there was so much turnover, losing Stephon Diggs, losing Gabe Davis, like his longtime top 2 touchdown scoring wide receivers, both gone in the same year. And Allen was still remarkably good. So I think that's a great answer. And I'll say for me, Dan,
can I add one more thing with
go,
Josh Allen real quickly?
Everything.
He did see a little bit of dip in passing yardage last year, and I think that a lot of people are going to say that like Stephon Diggs being out of the picture now is now detrimental to Josh Allen. But I think knowing that last year still made a deep run in the playoffs, was able to have win his first MVP trophy doing that without Stephon Diggs. Now I think he goes into 2025 with a little bit more confidence, because that was such a huge talking point in the offseason. How is he going to fare without his wide receiver 1? And now he doesn't really have a wide receiver 1, but he's kind of in this late career Patrick Mahomes type of point in his career where he doesn't need to have a Tyreek Hill or a Stephon Diggs. He's comfortable enough spreading the ball around, and I think that's when you see the confidence go up, and we could see Josh Allen this year hit a ceiling that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I mean, you make such good points for Josh Allen. I should probably just pick Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson here and play it a little bit safer. But at the end of the day, I've made the call that I think Jayden Daniels is the MVP this year. He's the NFL MVP. And I've said that he finishes as a QB1. I've said it for like about 6 months. I first said it on School of Scott. Now Scott Barrett has also like very much on the Jayden Daniels train. Chris Wecht, our projections guru over at FantasyPoints, is also very much on Jayden Daniels, has him projected to finish as the QB1. I don't like the Terry McLaurin stuff. I mean, we're about 20 days out, little less than 20 days out from the start of training camp, and there's been no contract worked out. But obviously Terry McLaurin, it just seems like a commander for life type. So I think that we're going to see a deal get done at some point. I don't like that, but I do like that Washington last year, Jayden Daniels scored the second most fantasy points all time by a rookie quarterback. And he did so with like middling offensive line play and a lack of weapons around him. It was a ton of Terry McLaurin. I am actually getting positive vibes with Deebo Samuel. I think there's a lot of like these Deebo looks fat type takes on X, and it's just. But Deebo to me looks good.
Like,
And
we
we
see
see
the
him.
NFL players, they shed like 20 pounds every training camp. Like, how many guys show up out of shape all the time? These are world-class athletes. Like, they can get in shape in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we saw this like this week. There's at the University of South Carolina, Debo's working out with Xavier Legette, who's
Yep.
obviously a next
Yep.
level type athlete, and Debo's looks awesome. And I
Yeah.
there's like these bad angle pictures for Debo Samuel where people will just gravitate towards them, and Debo's always like thick, and he's built
Mhm.
like a running back, but like I get positive vibes from the Washington beat reporters, and also just by the moves that Washington chose to make coaching staff wise. There's a lot of like Debo Samuel having sort of a bounce back here. And even if Debo doesn't have a real renaissance, he's still a significant upgrade over what we saw at the wide receiver 2 position last year. Washington lacked pretty much anyone who gave them anything yak wise. Debo, of course, really strong with the ball in his hands. I also think that the threat of Debo as a rusher is going to help them stylistically. So I love what they did there. Again, Terry McLaurin, complete vibes with Jayden Daniels. Scored more touchdowns than any Washington Commander slash Washington F football team slash Washington Redskin, like franchise history wide receiver. He had the most touchdown catches last year. So vibes there. But it's really the offensive line improvements where they go out and get Laramie Tunsil
Mhm.
from Houston. They draft Josh Connerly in the first round. And we've seen this time and time again where quarterbacks get better between year 1 and year 2. Now, a lot of people were going to go gotcha in the comments and say, look at this. The fantasy community is overrating a year 2 quarterback yet again. Last year, you guys steamed up CJ Stroud. Last year, you guys steamed up Anthony Richardson. Those are two of the worst picks ever. So I think actually the recency bias that the year 2 quarterbacks failing at ADP actually sort of helps Jayden Daniels here. There's going to be some apprehensive drafters who want to gravitate towards the known. And I'll say it's a dangerous game. I'm playing so like elevating Daniels to QB1 because Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson go ahead of him, but only about a round ahead of him. And then you have Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow who go just behind him. So there's cushion on either side where you could dive into a guy that we've seen score a ton for many seasons. But with Daniels, it's something about the jump from year 1 to year 2 historically for the truly elite players in fantasy. We saw what happened with Patrick Mahomes going from year
Yep.
1 to year 2, wins the MVP. Uh, Unbelievable year for Mahomes that season, finished as a QB1 in fantasy. Lamar Jackson, a part-time player as a rookie, wins the MVP, finishes as a QB1 in fantasy in year 2. I get a lot of parallels here with Jayden Daniels. We also talk about second-year offensive coordinators.
Joe Burrow, another
Joe,
year two guy who
absolutely.
blow up in year 2. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great call by you by Joe Burrow. And you get Cliff Kingsbury in year 2, seemed to vibe with Jayden Daniels. I think he also has the threat to lead the NFL in rushing yardage this year at the quarterback position, which has sort of been cheat code. We've seen that with Lamar for years. Jayden Daniels is a true challenger to that, had nearly 900 rushing yards, big time threat around the goal line as well. And we could see the touchdown passes go from 25 to 35 quite easily. So Jayden Daniels, my pick to be the QB1 overall this year. Where are you at on that one?
Curious if you know off the top of your head what the MVP odds are, because I really do like that call out. Because we know that MVP is a very narrative driven award. And I think if Jayden Daniels, we've got the fatigue of Josh Allen winning it last year, Lamar Jackson winning his MVPs. I think that, Mahomes would have to do something supernatural to win another MVP. So I think Daniels being the young, exciting guy in Washington, there's odds that could definitely make me enticed to place that bet for sure.
It's
When it
plus.
comes
It's
to
like plus. It's like plus 850. See, you're not. It's
yeah,
not. It's good odds. It's not
yeah,
monstrous. Like Lamar's plus 550. It's a wide open MVP field. All the guys you just mentioned: Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, all in like that plus 550 to plus 600 range. Patrick Mahomes, of course, is naturally there plus 650, and then Jayden Daniels at plus 850. Interestingly,
I like that. Yeah.
Jalen Hurts is 20-1 right now, which is interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be an overcorrection
You
by
might
some
have
of
to
the ways that
sprinkle
people are
that.
talking
You
about
might have to
Jalen
sprinkle
Hurts.
that one.
Yeah, but yeah, Jayden Daniels, man, just such a good player. I think the problem that I struggle putting him ahead of Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson is that I'm not getting those guys. And I want exposure to all three of these guys, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jayden Daniels. Realistically, I think all three of them have an equal chance of finishing as the overall QB1. I love the way Daniels plays and how that leads to fantasy points. Josh Allen is a different type of rusher. He is going to pick up first downs. He's going to run through defenders. He's going to score touchdowns. Jayden Daniels has that Lamar Jackson rushing ability where he can make people miss out in the open field. He can score from 85 yards out, and he gives you that 1,000-yard rusher ceiling that I don't think you're getting from anybody besides maybe Lamar Jackson and, crazy to say, maybe Justin Fields if he gets a full 17 games in New York this year. But there aren't many guys giving you that sort of rushing output. So really the strategy that I'm taking in drafts this year, and I don't want to get too off the rails talking about draft strategy, but I like taking any of these guys, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels is the one I have the most of because he just so happens to be the cheapest. But if I do miss out on those three guys, then I'm just okay waiting until like round 12 because this is just such a weird year for quarterbacks. Like last year, we saw the Sam Darnolds and the Baker Mayfields and these guys just, that were final round picks breaking out late in the year. And this year, when I start looking at the guys that are going super late in drafts, that you can get Justin Fields and JJ McCarthy and Cam Ward and guys that I think have similarly high ceilings that can be top 5, top 10 quarterbacks, it is tough to pay up for those middle round guys, but the upside you're getting from these three in Lamar, Allen, and Daniels makes me more than happy enough to pay up for them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that elite quarterback is an edge right now in multiple formats, and I think that they're priced correctly to really, really deliver. Tight end was interesting. We've had back-to-back seasons where a rookie finishes as the tight end 1 overall. Sam Laporta 2 seasons ago. Last year, Brock Bowers. On a per-game basis, it was George Kittle who led all tight ends in points scored per game last year. And of course, Trey McBride was excellent, was almost neck and neck with Brock Bowers. So there's a number of candidates this year, and it's feels like a really strong year for tight end. You mentioned in quarterback sort of your draft strategy. It feels like there's some really fun names behind these big three. Not necessarily challengers to finish as the tight end 1 overall, but guys that could have strong seasons in fantasy. But we got to focus on who's going to be the tight end 1. Who is it going to be, Dave?
So for me, it's George Kittle. And kind of like you were saying, where Jayden Daniels, who's going off the board as the quarterback 3, you've got him as your quarterback 1. Right now, George Kittle is going off the board as tight end 3, and he's kind of at the last guy in that elite tier. But it's crazy to me that I've got him ranked as my tight end 1, and I can consistently get this guy in round 4 or 5. And I think that's where he deserves to be. I mean, just an efficiency monster. Like this guy is just number 1 in yards per route run almost every single year. The usage has always been there, just consistently top 5, top 10 in targets per route run and target share. And now when you look at the changes to the offense this year, I mean, this has always been a team where George Kittle has been productive with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Now they're going into the season with no Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk is probably going to be on the mend to start the year. The only target competition in the early season is Ricky Pearsall, who, don't get me wrong, I love Ricky Pearsall, and Juwan Jennings. So this is the softest target competition that George Kittle has seen in a long time. We know that they have the faith in Brock Bowers. Long-term, Kittle is, a scary guy to invest in. He's getting up there in age. We don't know how the 49ers are going to look over the next few years. But in redraft, like looking just for the 2025 season, this is when we see tight ends at their absolute peak. It's those like age 28 to 32 years, or when we see tight ends looking really good. And we'll see prolonged success into the mid to late 30s occasionally. But I have no concerns about George Kittle getting up there in age. I think one of the big kind of sliding door moments here in San Francisco is going to be Christian McCaffrey. If he's healthy, he's going to gobble up a big chunk of the target share and take away from George Kittle a little bit. But I look at it to start the season, he's going to be the number 1 player on this offense. They're going to be running the offense through him. He's just a beast after the catch. He's heavily involved in the offense. He was a tight end 1 on a per game basis last year. And I'm excited about Brock Bowers, but a very different situation now there with added target competition, a new head coach. Now they're going to run the ball a little bit more with Achane Ginty. Trey McBride, love him as well. His usage last year was unbelievable, but we've seen that they want to get Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit more involved as well. So while there's slight reasons to knock Bowers and McBride, you can offset that with their age and say that they're still ascending. But right now, I just see a situation for George Kittle better than what he had last year, and he's going even cheaper in drafts.
Yeah, I love everything you said about George Kittle. And I've said that I think this is the year of the tight end. On this channel, on this show, I had Andrew Erickson on. We made sort of some bold predictions. We talked about these tight ends. I think all three of the big three get 17 points per game or more. So I think it's going to be a vintage
Oh yeah.
season for tight end scoring. Kittle's really interesting because when you look at all the turnover at the wide receiver room for San Francisco, and then you couple in losing this sort of weapon of mass destruction in Deebo Samuel, where they'd use him in like really creative ways around the line of scrimmage. I think whoever sort of gets additional manufactured looks, manufactured targets is going to have a really strong fantasy season. There's been arguments made for Ricky Pearsall with that. Maybe Christian McCaffrey sees a return to his sort of receiving upside that we were used to from seasons like 2022, 2023 for McCaffrey. But I look at Kittle and I say, there's a range of outcomes where this is a guy that has had fewer than 95 targets now for like 5 straight years and just been so efficient. What if San Francisco gets a little bit more Travis Kelce usage for Kittle,
Mm-hmm.
and there we see a season where he gets 120 targets? We saw early in his career he had a 135 target season and he scored 16 points per game. That was his best season ever, way back in 2018. And just getting him additional targets would take him into this next level stratosphere. That being said, I think Kittle might be the best ADP value at the tight end
Yeah.
position on Underdog. Right now, he goes as 44 overall. But I think that the tight end one is going to come from one of the two elite target earners in Bowers and McBride. I know you bring up the additional target competition, but what Brock Bowers was able to do last year at 21 years old, where he basically was Puka Nacua, but playing the tight end position, was just unbelievable. And I think there's room to run in for him. This is going to be the best quarterback play he's ever played with in the NFL in Geno Smith. He's still the number one here. Last year, he had 153 targets. I think he goes north of 165 this year. I think Brock Bowers and Trey McBride both break Zach Ertz's target record, and they both go north of 160 this year. So I'm really sort of making a case for McBride as well. But like you said, when it comes to McBride, you do have the threat of Marvin Harrison Jr., where I don't have that in Vegas. I think Jacoby Myers is a fine player, but I think he's a capped ceiling type, low end wide receiver 2,
Yeah.
high end wide receiver 3. With Marvin Harrison Jr., it's like a wide range here where he could become way more efficient and be a wide receiver 1 this year. And at the very least, I think you see fewer just dud games from Harrison Jr. So I love McBride, but I think it's Bowers. I think the peak season for Bowers, he's the only one of these tight ends that I mentioned that I think has 20 points per game in the wheelhouse. And we haven't seen a tight end get a 20 point per game season since Travis Kelce. I think Bowers is it. And the Ashton Genty addition, obviously I think Genty's going to get a ton of touches, but I think that the pace of the Chip Kelly led offense and the addition of Ashton Genty is just going to make them so efficient. So I'm banking on the talent. I'm banking on just an unbelievable player. And I'm banking on this offense being able to produce a high-end wide receiver 1 like scorer at the tight end position in Bowers. So Brock Bowers for me.
Yeah, and it's really hard to argue against anything you're saying there. I think when I look at the quarterbacks, those guys have been set in stone for me, where it's been Allen, Lamar, Daniels all offseason. I've got the same tier where I've got 3 guys atop my tight end rankings. And when the season first ended, it was Brock Bowers because I was just blown away with what he did his rookie season. And then I start looking at some of the usage metrics and I get allured by Trey McBride, who pulled over a 29% target share last year. You fold his target share in the wide receivers. He was 6th overall in target share last year as a tight end. So then I moved Trey McBride atop the list. And then I started thinking about it a little more and I go, man, George Kittle, you look at the changes in the San Francisco offense and the passing game is really going to run through him. And I moved him ahead. So I've constantly been shuffling these 3 around. And I really don't think that there's a right answer. I think all of these guys, similarly to what I said about the quarterbacks, could easily finish as the overall tight end 1. The nice thing in drafts, though, is you don't have to pay up for Kittle the way you have to pay up for McBride and Bowers. And you said that he's one of the best values in drafts. I completely agree with that there. This might change before kickoff, but right now I just see, when you start looking at projections and where the ball is going to go in San Francisco, it's really easy to set George Kittle up for a career high in targets this year. And if he can maintain or even take a slight dip off of that efficiency, he could still be, an 18, 20 point per game scorer.
Yeah, I love all 3. I think all 3 are really edges for you. And I think investing in the top 3 at the tight end position is a good strategy this year. So it's a vintage year at the tight end spot. And we butt heads on this one. We're in agreement on who the wide receiver 1 is. This one, I wanted to go bold, but how can you go bold here, Dave? How can you go bold?
Yeah, you look over the last 3 years, and it has been Justin Jefferson finishing as the wide receiver 1, and the next year we drafted him as the wide receiver 1, and he didn't finish that way. And then CeeDee Lamb finished as the wide receiver 1. We drafted him the next year as the wide receiver 1, and it didn't finish that way. So now, of course, Ja'Marr Chase coming off of a wide receiver 1 season, we're all drafting him as the wide receiver 1 and expecting him to buck that trend. But this is another one where I think you look at Justin Jefferson, Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb, all of these guys are great players, and I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. But they're just, this is the perfect storm for Ja'Marr Chase. Just a phenomenal player on the peak of his career right now, on a great offense with a good quarterback and maybe the worst defense in the league that leads them to these games where they're just forced to air the ball out. And Joe Burrow's throwing for 400 plus yards. So Ja'Marr Chase is the pretty obvious answer for me. But again, don't be surprised if, Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb are able to claw their way to a wide receiver 1 finish this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of strong candidates, and I could have gone super bold. I think, like, to be very simplistic, the number 1 scoring wide receiver for the last 4 years has led the NFL in targets and receptions, and also I think that the number 1 wide receiver has led the league in end zone targets on an even longer streak than that. So like that's a really safe bet. And when you start like naming these guys who we think could lead the league in targets and catches, it extends down a little bit. I think Puka Nacua is an interesting bet this year, but he hasn't had the peak touchdown season to sort of support a fantasy breaking type outcome. But when we look at Ja'Marr Chase, it's really hard to move away from him. I also look at the spike week ability of Chase, where even if Chase could be like the wide receiver 3 and then have a 2-week stretch and he's gapping the field as the wide receiver 1. Last year, he had 3 of the highest scoring weeks in fantasy football. 3 of the 11 highest scoring weeks in fantasy were Ja'Marr Chase weeks. He had a 55-pointer. He had a 45-pointer and a 41-pointer. And then you go back to 2023, he was also had a top 10 scoring week. I mean, like Ja'Marr Chase is just unbelievably efficient. I think that a lot of people chasing for a different name this year look at history and say how difficult it is for a player to maintain their wide receiver 1 overall status. And I get it, but Chase has just been this Teflon player who's the 5th overall pick in 2021. He's just turned 25 years old. He's the highest paid wide receiver in the league. And we talked about like the exigent circumstances surrounding players and how it affects them in fantasy. We think on paper, Cincinnati looks like a shootout team again. There's some question marks on defense. It seems to me like you're going to get a lot more Joe Burrow shootout environments. Ja'Marr Chase had 175 targets last year. Like Chase is just such an easy click. I mean, he's my number 1. Like I did my top 50 rankings at Fantasy Points. Ja'Marr Chase was easily the number 1 there. I take him number 1 in Underdog. I take him number 1 in FFPC, NFFC. Any format, I'm taking Ja'Marr Chase at the 101. In Superflex drafts, he's the highest drafted non-quarterback for me. I consider taking him at like the 104 at right after the big 3 quarterbacks. So, like, I don't think we need to get cute on this one. I think it's Ja'Marr Chase. Anything to add on Mr. Chase?
I mean, he's just like a perfect NFL wide receiver. There's not a thing he can't do. Like he's got Deebo Samuel's after the catch abilities and Justin Jefferson's contested catch abilities and Tyreek Hill's speed and CeeDee Lamb route running abilities. I mean, this guy literally can do it all, whether he's getting balls deep downfield, whether he's pulling down contested catches in the end zone, or whether he's taking a slant to the house. I mean, he's just a perfect wide receiver. And like I said, the situation with Joe Burrow and the Bengals defense, perfect wide receiver in a perfect situation. Sure, like we can get cute and talk about other players, but history tells us that he probably won't repeat, but I'm not making a bet on anybody else with the 101 besides Chase.
Yeah, it's Ja'Marr Chase, and we've seen it before. Cooper Kupp could have repeated as the wide receiver 1. He had, of course, got injured, but he was leading the league in points per game at the time. And we go back to the Antonio Brown years. Antonio Brown was just ripping with multiple seasons as the wide receiver 1 overall. So, like, go back in history. It's happened again. Just bet on Ja'Marr Chase. Question for you, like we talked about dark horse candidates. Give us a dark horse candidate that's not necessarily a player you mentioned that you think could end up finishing as the top scorer at their respective positions.
So when we talked about running backs, we talked about Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson kind of being in this tier of their own. I have Devon Achane right behind them. And I kind of debate sneaking him into that tier as well, because what we've seen from Devon Achane are two very different seasons so far in his NFL career, but they have both been very, very productive. And I like to see that. As a rookie, we saw this guy with one of the most efficient rushing seasons in NFL history. And we got really excited about his opportunities as a rusher and what he could see with an expanded workload. Then going into year two, we saw his usage change drastically as a rusher. They were just slamming him between the tackles. He wasn't getting those zone runs out wide where he was able to make the big plays, but he was able to offset the dip in efficiency as a rusher by becoming just a target magnet out of the backfield and really padding his numbers with the receiving profile. So now I look at him as being, dare I say it, kind of situation proof. Like if they're winning, they're going to give the ball to him and he's going to run the ball a lot. We know that he's got the efficiency as a rusher. If they're down, he's going to be used consistently out of the backfield where they put this big importance on getting the ball out of to his hand quickly. So whether it's a rusher or as a receiver, he can check both boxes. We've seen that he's got one of the best breakaway speeds in the NFL. We've seen that he can catch passes. This is a guy that is just getting overlooked. I understand people get excited about, if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy or what Ashton Jinzy can do, but Devon Achane is getting, consistently falling to that 2-3 turn. And I think he's got, close to as good of a chance of finishing as the overall RB1 as those guys do in that elite tier.
Yeah, I think he's definitely my favorite second round target at the running back position. I love Devon Achane. What's interesting is I read a report from Joe Schad in Miami today that the yards per carry, they want to get back a little closer to the rookie year where they're going to use him a little bit more as an inside runner, which, he's a smaller player, but he's such a powerful and explosive runner on the inside. Go back to like the Texas A&M tape. He was so good on those sort of runs. And then you go back to his rookie season where he had like a next world, like 7.8 yards per carry or something. He was ripping long runs up the middle. So that's interesting to me. I completely agree with you. I think he leads all running backs in receptions. I said on another show, I think he'd get 100 receptions this year. The only trepidation that I have, if there's any, is slight apprehension on the Miami Dolphins offense overall, being able to support it. But I think
Offensive line especially.
Offensive line, yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm going to have Scott DiBenedetto on School of Scott. He's our offensive line guru. He had Miami very lowly ranked in our top 32 offensive line collection. So I'm gonna try to pick his brain a little bit, look for that on School of Scott. But Achane's it's an exceptional talent, exceptional receiving profile, and the loss of Jonnu Smith, I think, bodes well for if they continue the get the ball out of to his hands quickly offensive model that we saw last year. Achane could catch 100 balls this year. So I love that call. I'll throw out Drake London. I've talked about just very, very simply identifying a player who could lead the NFL in targets and catches. And I think that's Drake London. I love Drake London. I think he's a really great value in the second round. And we saw a 39% target share in the games that Michael Penix started last year. So I think that Atlanta, like we talked about Bijan Robinson, and I'll talk about Drake London, I think this could be a very consolidated and really, really strong teammate consolidation where both of these guys finish like top 5 scorers at their position. But even a step further, I think they both challenge for like towards the top. With Drake London, I think he's going to be efficient in the red zone as well. And he's got youth on his side. I'm not betting on it. There's no reason for you to reach on Drake London. But when he is there in like the middle of the second round, I think he makes for a really, really strong pick. Your quick thoughts on London?
I think that this is just a perfect wide receiver quarterback pairing. I'm not sure if I've talked about it with you this offseason, but when I go back and watch those games together, where they played together, Michael Penix was just allowing Drake London to do what he does best, which is just make plays on contested balls. And if you look at what he did in college, he's doing the same thing with Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. He isn't afraid to trust his receivers. And that's something that Kirk Cousins hasn't really done throughout his career. You look, the receivers that have done well under Kirk Cousins, it's always been the guys that can separate and kind of get open out on an island, and he's able to hit them. But Michael Penix, there was one play specifically that jumped out to me where he had a contested ball that he threw deep into the end zone, and it got broken up by Gavin Bartholomew, went back to the huddle, ran the same exact play on the next snap. He's same exact coverage in the end zone. Penix threw it up to him again, and Drake London came down with a deep touchdown. And I think that's what gets me so excited is Drake London. People can pick apart his separation and his abilities to do that, but his strengths are as a contested catch guy. And Michael Penix does not shy away from throwing to covered receivers. So I could see Drake London easily having 18, 20 touchdowns this season just on that thesis alone.
I'm here for it, and I got the bags of Drake London that would really love that outcome that you're talking about, Dave. Give us one big, bold prediction, any position, any level of the draft. Love getting these bold predictions in this time of year. Give us something spicy.
Yeah, I'll bring some real heat on this one. I don't think Omarion Hampton is going to be a top 5 rookie running back this year. And I know, he's got the first round draft capital. I love his long term outlook. You're looking at a good run first team with a good offensive line. I understand why there's reason to be excited about Omarion Hampton. But Najee Harris is not a guy that NFL coaches like. And I know that we as fantasy analysts looking at the efficiency metrics and all this just can't stand Najee Harris, but there's a reason that they paid him money to be in Los Angeles. There's a reason that he consistently saw the touches that he did in Pittsburgh. He doesn't have the breakaway speed that we like, but he is not a liability in the run game. He's going to move piles. He's going to take a 3-yard gain and turn it into a 4-yard gain. And that's what gets NFL players snaps. So when I look at some of these other guys, I like Omarion Hampton better as a prospect than I do some of the other guys, but Travion Henderson, you're telling me that this guy's going to have the pass catching role in a Josh McDaniels offense? I want that. Caleb Johnson, he's basically a souped up Najee Harris that's going to be dropped right into that role. I like that. Quinshon Judkins, he's going to see a ton of touches in this Cleveland backfield. It might not be pretty, but I think that he's going to be able to volume his way to a better season than Omarion Hampton. So I like Omarion Hampton. I like his long-term outlook, and he could still be a good draft pick because I think that as the season goes on, he can carve out a bigger and bigger role. But right now, I've got him ranked as the 5th running back out of the rookies this year.
Dave, you're killing the Omarion Hampton bag holders, including myself, with that one.
Sorry.
But you crushed it on the show today. Let everybody know once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, everything's over at Football Guys. I've got the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show I'm doing with Alfredo Brown, Football Guys Dynasty Show that I'm doing with Jeff Bell. I've got the Launchpad, which is a solo show coming out every single week. Theo, our episode is going to come out Friday, July 4th, so be sure to check that out on audio platforms for anybody who wants to. I've also got a Best Ball live stream that we're hosting over on Drafters. That's going to start next week with Dan Hendry, who was last year's $500,000 winner, so staying super busy over at footballguys.com.
Yeah, make sure you check out all of Dave's work, and make sure you stick with us here at Fantasy Football Daily. Check out School of Scott, Dynasty Life as well. We're going to help you crush your leagues this season.